In this episode, we will be discussing California landlord may enforce lease after tenant abandons property. The California Civil Code, Chapter 2, Section 1951.4 allows for a landlord to continue to enforce a lease under the following circumstances after a tenant abandons a rental property. Lease must provide this remedy. The remedy described in this section is available only if the lease provides for this remedy. In addition to any other type of provision used in a lease to provide the remedy described in this section, a provision in the lease in substantially the following form satisfies this section. It shall read as follows. The lessor has the remedy described in California Civil Code, Section 1951.4. Lessor may continue lease in effect after lessee's breach and abandonment and recover rent as it becomes due. If lessee has right to sublet or assign, it should be subject to only reasonable limitations. Lease may continue without termination. Even though a tenant of real property has breached the lease and abandoned the property, the lease continues in effect for so long as the landlord does not terminate the tenant's right to possession, and the landlord may enforce all of his or her rights and remedies under the lease, including the right to recover the rent as it becomes due, if any of the following conditions is satisfied. The lease permits the tenant or does not prohibit or otherwise restrict the right of the tenant to sublet the property, assign the tenant's interest in the lease, or both. The lease permits the tenant to sublet or assign the tenant's interest in the lease, or both, subject to express standards or conditions, provided they are reasonable. Or the lease permits the tenant to sublet, assign the tenant's interest in the lease, or both, with the consent of the landlord, and the lease provides that the consent shall not be unreasonably withheld, or the lease includes a standard implied by law that consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. Actions that do not qualify as termination. For the purposes of the subsection, lease may continue without termination. The following do not constitute a termination of the tenant's right to possession: acts of maintenance or preservation or efforts to relet the property, the appointment of a receiver upon initiative of the landlord to protect the tenant's interest under the lease, and withholding consent to a subletting or assignment or terminating a subletting or assignment if the withholding or termination does not violate the rights of the tenant specified under the previous subsection. Lease may continue without termination. For additional laws and articles, visit AmericanLandlord.com.